NATO is considering its response to a missile strike on Polish soil, which left 2 people dead during a wave of Russian rocket attacks on Ukraine. U.S. President Joe Biden says it's unlikely the missiles were fired from Russia, and the Kremlin is denying it was responsible. The Polish president has also confirmed that there's no sign that the missile strike was an intentional attack. Our chief correspondent, John Cookson, has the story.
Poland's military is on high alert after a deadly missile strike on a village near the border with Ukraine. The Poles say the rockets or single rocket were likely Russian-made, but Ukraine has Russian rockets too. The question today is who fired them with such devastating effect, costing the lives of 2 people. US President Joe Biden was asked if Russia was the source of the attack.
There is preliminary information that contests that. I don't want to say that till we completely investigate, but it's unlikely in the minds of the trajectory that it was fired from Russia, but we'll see.
World leaders at a summit in Bali held an emergency meeting of the G7 group against the backdrop of Article 5 of the NATO alliance, which says an attack on one member state, in this case Poland, is considered an attack on all members, sparking a military response. Instead, NATO is invoking Article 4, whereby Poland is consulted before a more nuanced response, such as bolstering the defences of East European member states. Afterwards, Britain's Prime Minister spoke of his solidarity with Ukraine and Poland.
While other world leaders were working together to tackle the greatest challenges our people face, Putin was launching indiscriminate attacks on civilians in Ukraine. In the wake of these attacks, today we held an urgent meeting of allies to underscore our solidarity with Ukraine and Poland. I also spoke to Polish President Duda this morning to offer my wholehearted support and assurance that the United Kingdom stands steadfastly behind him and his people at this worrying time. We should all be clear, none of this would be happening if it weren't for Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
While a NATO meeting gathered in Brussels to decide the next move, families of the 2 dead men from a Polish village were being mourned. They both had work connections with the local school. John Cookson, Arise News.
And John Cookson joins us now from London for more. Good day to you, Johnson. Welcome to Newsday. Now, there's been an emergency meeting of NATO ambassadors to discuss the Poland missile strike. Can you give us a little bit more information about this?
That's right, ladies. Let me bring you right up to date with developments in the last half hour. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, has just given a press conference and made it absolutely clear that this was not a deliberate attack by Russia. He also said that the cause of the explosion was most likely the remnants of a Ukrainian defense system crashing to earth and exploding on the village. This press conference still underway, which we're monitoring. So Stoltenberg really reducing tensions now, and I'm also hearing that not even Article 4 of the NATO alliance treaty is being invoked at the moment by Poland, but we'll need confirmation of that. So it seems that this was not a tragic accident, of course, but something that happens in war, that things go wrong from time to time. The Ukrainians were trying to shoot down a Russian missile, and in the course of that, the remnants of that crashed to earth and landed in Poland, some 10 kilometers on the Polish side of the Ukrainian border. So Jens Stoltenberg, as I say, reducing tensions greatly there. He was asked a short time ago whether, in fact, NATO would increase its defences in Eastern Europe, and he said they'd already done that. They've already put thousands of troops into position, and also increased defence systems in Eastern European countries, like, for example, Poland. So NATO very much reducing the tensions that came from this, because there was obvious alarm, because it was first reported by US intelligence that a Russian missile had landed in Poland, and you had newspaper headlines this morning along the lines of Russia bombs Poland. Well, that's not quite true, as we've now found out that it was, in fact, an error and something that happens during wartime. That's not to say that the deaths of 2 people aren't tragic. Of course it is. But that's an explanation as to what happened in Poland last night.
Well said, John. Now, what are the differences between NATO's Articles 4 and 5 in light of what's happened in Poland?
Yeah, the treaty was drawn up after the Second World War in 1949, and Article 5 is the bedrock of NATO's defence, which says basically an attack on one country is an attack on all NATO members, currently 30 members of NATO. This has only been invoked once, and that was after the 9/11 attack by Al-Qaeda back 20-odd years ago now. And Article 4 is where a country feels threatened. For example, Turkey in 2012 and 2015 during the Syrian conflict, it felt threatened after one of its fighter planes was shot down. And under those circumstances, NATO members meet to discuss what the response should be, what the appropriate response should be. Now, Article 4, having been discussed, could lead to Article 5 being triggered, but we're not even in the ballpark for that with this particular incident in Poland.
Now, on the sidelines of that, of course, dozens of Russian missiles landed in Ukraine yesterday. Can you tell us a bit more about the impact that has made?
Well, President Zelensky saying last night that 90 missiles were launched by Russia as far apart as Kharkiv in the east and Lviv in the west, and also on the capital Kiev. And at the moment, 10 million Ukrainians are without electricity at this hour. The Russian strikes were part of a familiar pattern of drone and cruise missile attacks on electrical power stations, water pumping plants, sewage systems, something that has a devastating effect on cities, because they can't live without these essential services, and the Ukrainians having a hard time repairing equipment in the light of the waves of attacks by Russia. Russia, of course, responding no doubt to criticism of its invasion of Ukraine by members of the G20 yesterday in Bali, and the power outages also led to power cuts in neighbouring countries, because Ukraine supplies electricity to other nations. So it had a widespread effect, and still continues to this hour to have a widespread effect in Ukrainian cities.
Very well said. Arise Chief Correspondent John Cookson, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. We appreciate your time and analysis as always.